Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Garth Schaefer with the Colorado State Conservation Board. Welcome to our coffee hour. This morning, we've got Lori Kubitz with the Office of Technology Information with information on strategies and resources that conservation districts can use to ensure that they are in compliance with the new web content accessibility standards. So welcome, Lori. Thanks for being here. Oh, Lori, I believe you are on mute.
Okay, now I'm not. You can hear me?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay. All right, thank you for having me, Garth. Today I'm going to go over a general overview of the new bill that came out in 2021, so it's not so new, but it might be new to you. So I'll give a general overview of that. And then I'll also go over just some really basic accessibility fundamentals to give you an idea of what your responsibilities will be. So Garth, can you see the screen I have up for accessibility law and planning?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So like I said, I'll go over accessibility basics. And then this presentation also includes accessibility planning, which really encompasses like an entire organization. So it might be a little bit too much. I'm not going to go over that in this meeting, but I will share the slides with you so you can review them later. So HB 21-1110, like I said, this was a bill that passed in 2021. It makes it a civil rights violation for a government agency, including local governments in Colorado, to exclude people with disabilities from receiving services or benefits because of lack of accessibility. So the gist of it is any Colorado government entity that doesn't comply with the state accessibility standards, which I will provide in this presentation, could be subject to, well, getting sued, number one. That's the big risk. So if that happens, then the government entity could be subject to injunctive relief or a fine up to $3,500. And that could be per accessibility issue. So I'm going to go through how to avoid that. So it's important to know that and I'm going to mainly focus on websites here because I believe this group, primarily the technology that you're using for communication is websites. So for websites, it's important to remember that there is the platform and there is the content that's added to the platform. A platform could be something like WordPress or Google Sites, a Drupal website, or you could be going through a vendor to set up a website on a platform that they provide. And then the content is the second piece, and that can be text, images, video, anything documentation that you link to. So if you have PDFs, if you link to any kind of, a Google Doc or Word, spreadsheets, presentations, things like that, all of that needs to be accessible. And in the second part of this presentation, I'm going to go over some basics for how you can do that. And then the other part of this bill is that OIT, the Office of Information Technology, provides the standards that outline how to comply. And those are basically based on the WCAG standards. And WCAG is a worldwide group of accessibility folks who have created guidelines to make sure that anything that has a user interface can be accessible. So it's very straightforward and cut and dry, but I want you all to know that it's not something that you have to know. So I'm going to give you some guidelines so that you can comply with them without having to read the WCAG standards. because that can be a little technical and overwhelming. And then the last part of that is that the deadline for compliance is pretty soon. It's July 1st of 2024. So we advise, having a plan, knowing what technology you are responsible for. Again, it might be a website, it might be content that you add to your social networks like Facebook or Instagram. And it also includes applications, and I'll go over specifically what it is too. So it relates to all technology, software and hardware that's both public facing and internal facing, including any technology that is procured, that's used by the public or used by an employee. So if you have hired a vendor, you want to make sure that that vendor provides an accessible platform, for example. If they are creating a WordPress site for you, you can ask your vendor to provide documentation that the platform is accessible. The technology includes, but is not limited to, websites, applications, kiosks, digital signage, documents, video, audio, and third-party tools. Those third-party tools could be like if you have a Google Calendar embedded in your website or something like that. So it's those kind of embedded technologies that you're using. So I want to clarify that because it says anything that's public facing or that's internal facing, this bill supports not only the people that are visiting your website, but it also supports all of you to make sure that you have an equal opportunity for being successful in the jobs that you do every day. So like I said, the bill requires that all government entities comply with WCAG 2.1. There is a link to the technical standard that outlines what that means. Like I said, I'm going to go over some of those basics so you don't have to necessarily read the WCAG or the technical standard because that's not fun. And then I want to emphasize again that this bill is very clear about liability for non-compliant content lying with the public entity that manages the content and that manages the platform. So if you hire a vendor, it's your responsibility to make sure that that vendor provides an accessible, compliant platform. And then all of the content that you add to that platform needs to be accessible as well. All right, so like I said, this presentation has accessibility planning outlined in it. It's really goes into detail about that. And really, I'm going to tell you the gist is make sure that you have an inventory of all of the technology that you use. So it could just be a spreadsheet and you have a website and you have these documents. You have this social, you use these social networks, and then you're constantly updating it to make sure that you are aware of all of those digital touch points that you use or that you share out to the public, and you operationalize accessibility. So it's really important that it's something that you do and that you're conscious of every day. It just becomes a part of, your everyday job, just like, using spell check or making sure that your branding, all of your documents are branded. Then accessibility is part of that checklist for like quality control for everything that goes out and everything that you do. I'm going to share in the chat this presentation, and then I'm going to jump to the fundamentals. So give me 1 second here while I shift. And this this is more in depth about those basics of how to create accessible content. What does accessibility mean, and why do we do it?
Laura, it looks like we lost you. Looks like you somehow got muted again, so you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I don't use Zoom every day. I usually use Google Meet, so thanks for being patient here.
No worries.
Okay, can Garth, can you see my screen, the digital accessibility fundamentals?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So, so accessibility, it's not something that you're gonna get perfect right away. It's something that takes practice and you'll get used to it. Like I said, if it becomes something that you just do every day, you'll get better and better. Why does it matter? Not only is HB 211110 a huge risk for all of us because there's the potential for lawsuits, but really it helps to increase your reach with the people that you communicate with, right? Not only, you know, your communities, but also lawmakers and other stakeholders. So it includes people who have visual disabilities, auditory disabilities, cognitive disabilities, things like ADHD and dyslexia. This law supports all of that, and people with mobility disabilities as well. So it really is the right thing to do, and it creates more value for your organization. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's really the bill HB 211110, what was brought about by some really amazing advocates and lawmakers who have decided that it's finally time that we make government services accessible to everyone. As you can see here, we've had accessibility laws on the books, specifically this 1990 ADA law for over 30 years, and this government has not been complying. So this is forcing government to comply to finally make government services accessible. And as you saw in the last slide, or maybe you didn't, up to 25%, well, not even up to, there's an estimate of around 25% of our population is disabled. So, you know, not everyone, it's not obvious that everyone is disabled. It could be color blindness. Like I said, it could be a cognitive disability. And especially in these days where we're all on screens, it's really not obvious. I work with several of my colleagues are blind, and it's not even obvious in those situations. So we always want to not make assumptions and not use the excuse of, well, no one in this meeting is blind, so I don't need to make, you know, my meeting materials accessible. So we want to, again, as we operationalize accessibility, then we have everyone covered. So the four main principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And that's the acronym POUR. Perceivable means that people can identify content by sight, sound, and or touch, regardless of their device or operating system. So regardless of their disability and what tools they have to use. Operable means that people can operate it, again, regardless of their disability. They can operate any buttons, navigation, and identify it by clicking, tapping, swiping or using voice commands. Understandable means that people can understand the content, that it's predictable, that there's plain language, that, for example, you're not only using color to identify something. Again, people who are colorblind or who are using screen readers won't catch that color. And then robust really speaks to the platform, that the platform is adaptable and can stay up to date with the changes in technology and still be accessible. So this really, how I like to kind of in a nutshell say it is, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We spend a lot of time making our content beautiful, or you know, like, ooh, this needs more color, or this needs a fancy font. But really, simple is the most beautiful thing that you can do to make it functional and to communicate clearly. So I'm going to speak a little bit about websites, but a lot of this, the majority of it, can really also be applied to all of your documents, excuse me. So documents and websites have the same accessibility issues many times. Sorry. So we're going to go over proper structure, images, links, forms, tables, videos, and typography here. And again, like I said, I'll share this presentation with you so you can look at more of the details, but I'm going to go through each one just to give you a general overview here. So structure and content is actually really important, and it's probably the easiest thing that you can do to make all of your content accessible. And that really is making sure that everything is nested, not using giant paragraphs of content, but breaking it up into easily consumable chunks, and making it really easy to scan, because people will be searching for content. They don't necessarily want to read every single word. There are people who will go to your website and there is content that they will be reading every single word. But for generally speaking, people find what they need by searching for certain keywords. So this is really helpful, not only for people who are blind and use screen readers, because using a screen reader, you're going to tab through everything. Imagine you can't use a mouse. You're relying on the screen reader and your navigation, either tabbing or using arrow keys to go from header to header. That's going to make it easier also for people with cognitive disabilities, ADHD and dyslexia, and many other neurological issues, to be able to find the content that they need easily without getting discouraged and just being like, this is not for me, I'm out of here. I have a background as a user experience designer, and I've done many usability tests, and it's amazing how many times people will get to a PDF or a web page that's just a block of text, and they'll just leave. They won't even bother with reading it. So specifically, headings, the heading hierarchy is key. This is especially important for people who use screen readers. So having the logical order and not skipping headings. So an H1 followed by an H2 followed by an H3. If you have an H1, excuse me, and an 8, and it jumps to an H3, there's some people who use screen readers that will tab looking for headings in order as they scan, and it will actually skip headings, and they'll skip the content, important content that you've provided. So that's important. Also, don't use blank headers. Sometimes people will use a blank header to create space in your content, but a screen reader it's really annoying because it will read that header and there will be no content. And if you imagine if you're not cited, you have no idea, is there content there, and my screen reader isn't reading it correctly. So try to use the proper headings. Lists, again, lists support that ability to scan very easily. It also helps to keep your content very clear and to the point. So, making sure that the most important content is at the top, and then use lists to highlight and break down the content to make it easier to digest or consume. Links and buttons. Links should be very clearly labeled, and buttons as well. I don't know how many of you are actually like creating buttons, but don't use click here more or learn more as the only link. You want to use descriptive text, because some screen reader users will be tabbing through looking for links. So this is links are primary content. So they'll be scanning by tabbing through, and learn more doesn't say anything. Something like learn more about our legislative activities, or find out how you can XYZ is much more helpful. Tables should be used for simple data comparison only, and not for laying out your content. So try not to use tables for, chunks of content. Lists are really fantastic for that. Tables are difficult for screen readers to read, especially in a website where it may not read the table header and column in each cell. So, if a person using a screen reader is tabbing through a complex cell, they only get that content in the cell. They don't know what the column header is or the row header, and that the value gets lost there. Also, empty cells are really difficult. So I know sometimes we use empty cells in tables to make a table look better, but it creates a situation for people who use screen readers that's kind of like a battleship, where they have to keep tabbing over looking for where the next content is. And then once they find that content, usually there's another chunk of content, right? So those are some basic guidelines for tables. For images, you always want to have alternative text or alt text included in your image. In many platforms, when you're creating that content, if it's a document, you right click on the image and there will be the opportunity to add alt text. Alt text should describe the image. If you're providing an image for people who are sighted, it should also provide the same value for people who are not sighted. So, like I said earlier, you could be like, oh, this needs an image, but is the image providing any value? It could be, yes, this is, for example, on this picture, this slide, there is a person who is skiing. And an example alt text would be downhill snow skier in bright green jacket and black pants carving out snow with their skis on a mountain slope. So this image gives the content the feeling of being outside, and it evokes feelings, right? And that's what you want to share with a person who is not sighted as well. Also, branding. All of your logos should also have alt text, because and it should include any branding that you want to evoke through, through that image as well. I was doing some testing with a person who uses a screen reader, and I had included the actual colors and iconography in the logo alt text, and the person using the screen reader was like, oh, that is really cool. I had no idea that the logo was, evoking all of these things. So it really sends the message of your brand, even with your logos. Also, along with that, alt text obviously using images of logos that have text is fine. I highly discourage using images that are just text, especially lots of text. So people many times will, especially in a presentation, use like fancy visualizations that have a lot of text and images to communicate anything really, but you'll want to make sure that that is either included in the text of your website or your document, or just cut the image out altogether and just put it just in, in the text of your website or document. Images are really challenging because you can't put all of that in an alt text field. It's limited to about 200 characters, give or take, depending on what the platform is. So I'm going to share a resource with you for creating alt text that will help you with those more complex images like graphs, charts, and maps. Color contrast and color dependency. So like I mentioned, people who are colorblind, many people who are colorblind won't even see if you have something in bright red, if something is important. You'll also want to use another element like bold or italics to indicate that. So don't use color alone. Audio and video content. For video, you always want to have captions. So in a meeting, for example, like we're using Zoom right now, we all have the ability to turn on captions for ourselves, right? If it's recorded, and you're sharing it with the public, you'll want to make sure that there are captions included. And there are several tools that you can use with that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that right now, but I can share a resource for accessible meetings and for sharing recorded meetings. You also want to include a transcript. Many platforms like Zoom and Google Meet will provide a transcript if you start it at the beginning. And then again, there are some other tools that you can use for that. And then you always want to make sure that if there are images, like there's many videos that just have like images and music playing and no talk at all. And that's, it's beautiful to people who can see, but to blind people, they just hear the music and they wonder what's going on. So having a descriptive audio along with it will help to make it compliant. And then of course, for audio only, again, make sure that there's the transcript. And like I said, I'll provide a guide for accessible meetings at the end too. So just to kind of wrap this part up, it is something that if you just start doing it, you may not nail it right away, but you will, if you make it a habit, it'll just be part of your everyday, content creation. Having a plan is really helpful. That first presentation has a planning template. It's probably going to feel very overwhelming, but that presentation makes it very clear. Take what you need from it. Even if you just have a spreadsheet, that will help you get started. yeah, it's a journey. So I'm going to post this presentation here. And then this presentation also has some great resources. It has this web of accessibility evaluation tool, and that's a web extension that you can add to your browser. And when you turn it on, it will show you where the accessibility issues are. It's not 100%. It won't give you, every single error, but it's definitely better than nothing. And then there's some guides for writing for accessibility and accessibility principles. But the big one here is that last resource, OIT. We have a website for accessible web services, and it has roles for accessibility. And at the bottom, there is a link to HB 211110 summary, and there's an FAQ. There's more details. We have a memorandum about it if you want to learn more about that. And then over here on the right, we have how-to guides. So this really goes through just those real basics. So if you want to know more about creating accessible PDFs and documents or links or images, you can go here. It's really great, helpful guide. And with that, I know this might feel like a fire hose of information, so I'm going to stop and open the floor to any questions. Marissa, go ahead.
Well, first of all, here's the first comment. If there's so many conservation districts that have part-time employees, like 2 days a week, and have no funding, and they don't have technology people, like this seems to, I mean, we're going to be compliant. I hired a vendor to do this, but if we didn't have a vendor to do this, I think that what would happen is everybody would just take down their websites, because this is too much for somebody who's my age or older to try to do with this. I just don't see how conservation districts are going to comply, especially the smaller ones that have like a 1 day a week employee or something. It's very difficult for me to see how that's going to work. But we did hire a vendor, and this is a fire hose. One thing I caught was Facebook. How do we make Facebook compliant? Is it?
So, that's a great question, Marissa. And first, I want to address your first comment. It is a lot of work. But if you have just a single website, it's also totally doable. Like I said, if you have a plan, and also I highly recommend working together collaboratively. I think your comment that you've hired someone, clearly you have some insight already that is very valuable to share. That has been the key for not only other local governments, but for our state agencies as well. There is a learning curve, but I think as you start to understand, what your responsibilities are and how to go about it, it does become a lot easier. And I also want to say that it's impossible to be 100% compliant, much less 100% compliant by July 1st of 2024. That accessibility, that first presentation I shared with you, will walk you through how to make sure that, like I said, you have a plan, you are operationalizing accessibility. So you have that person come in for, once a day, or, even a half a day. And part of that time, they are using these resources, right? If they're creating website content, then they need to have the skills to be able to create accessible content.
Well,
And
if it was just up to me to, because I hardly maintain our website as it is because I'm not good at it. And you know, I'm 57 years old. I'm not the techie kind of person, but there is this company out there that is helping special districts. I think that they're very reasonable. And it does have that tool built in that tells you about whether you're compliant. It has a little meter that will tell you if everything you put on is what you're supposed to have on there. But I would not do this job anymore if I had to continue this because I wouldn't be able to do the rest of my job. It's just too hard. I mean, I'm already bad at the website, but now I feel like I'm excited because I'm going to have a new website and we will be compliant and it will be more dynamic and easier to use. So I think it's good that it did push us into that direction, but if we didn't have the resources to hire somebody, I would be very, very, very overwhelmed.
yeah,
Very, very. But
Marissa,
anyway,
can you-
I do have that covered.
Okay, so Facebook, it's really just about creating accessible content. So if you add an image, add alt text to it.
Okay.
If you know, like I said, don't create giant blocks of text. Use lists. Make your links descriptive. These are all things that you don't
Well,
have to be super tech savvy to do. They just become, you know,
I'm also lazy with the Facebook. So what I do a lot is sharing from other programs, you know, like CSU Extension will put something out and I'll share their Master Gardener class, or I'll put up a flyer for what I'm doing. So I don't even write things on Facebook. I just share or throw a picture up. And so if I'm sharing something from somebody else, how do I know if it has in it what it needs to have in it?
If you didn't create that content and if
Mhm.
you are not, you know, you're not paying for that platform, you're not
Mhm.
managing the platform, you're
Right.
not responsible for other people's content.
Okay. But let's say I put up a flyer that I made and I put it in, it'll be as a picture. So I can do an alt text on a flyer that I put in.
Right. Yeah. And it's also a good idea if, you know, if you have that content on your website too, just to link to that, that would be easier. Just make it text on your website.
Well, if I put it on my website, it's automatically going to be put the way it needs to be through the people that I'm hired because I pay a monthly fee for them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be a learning curve. So we're going to meet as conservation districts next week. So Garth, are we going to be talking about this as a group?
We don't have it on the schedule, but we can certainly make time for some discussion around it for sure.
Okay, because I feel like I'm okay on the timeline of doing this, but it might be easier if we talk to somebody that's been using something like this longer. Because I go live next week or the week after. So I haven't used it yet. I just think
Marissa,
yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the services that this vendor is providing for you?
Sure. I always do everything that Debbie Mitchell does out of Fremont because we work closely together. And she's always on top of, you know, what needs to be done compliance wise. So they hired this company Streamline, which is in it's based out of Sacramento, California, but they cover all of Colorado, several other Western states, and they're working.
Uh-oh, we lost you.
Sorry, they're up to date on each state's laws. So, you know, they're specific to special districts. So they understand the kinds of things that we're doing. And it's called Streamline. And if you are a member of the Special District Association, you get great pricing. So it's based on your budget, your yearly budget. And since our website was woeful and very, very little, it was a very simple website, they only charged me $100 to migrate it. And then I pay $50 a month for maintenance. And that gives me unlimited content, unlimited technical support, unlimited pages. So
and what are they doing for accessibility wise?
So they have built-in platforms that monitor all of the, state things. And then they'll all my pictures will have alt text immediately. When I upload my PDFs, they're compliant. And when I can go to a tab and it'll tell me everything's compliant except this image or something, it'll, if something got through, there's a meter on there that would tell me that it isn't compliant and I need to fix it. It would just pop up immediately.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So, I'm not just saying only Streamline can do it, but they are geared toward special districts. And I think it's reasonable.
Okay.
And they're very, I can call them anytime and they will do that. They will give you a domain name and everything if you want. We chose to keep our own domain name and own it, But other than that, they've been very good to work with. But like I said, we don't go live until the 22nd, and then I'll know how things are going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. If you have the resources, definitely. If you don't have the resources, I want to emphasize that it is possible to have an accessible website, especially if you don't have the resources. You probably have a very small web presence, and it's possible to do that on your own. It's really,
and we would have pared it down to almost nothing, just because here's how I looked at it and told my board, if I had to hire even a high school kid to come in and help me start this, it would have cost as much as it is for me to pay the monthly fee, and I know that it's going to be compliant and we aren't going to get sued. So that was how I sold it to the board. But yes, if we didn't have that funding and it was just a 1 day a week person job that I would be doing everything, we would pare it down to almost nothing probably. That's what I would guess.
Yeah. Ashley, okay, so let me go back to the questions. First, Ashley asked, is there funding available to make sure the website is in compliance? So are you all familiar with SIPA, the State Internet Portal Authority? I'm going to pull up their website. They have a micro grant program. I'm not aware of other grants, but there's, or funding necessarily. So this is one of those unfunded mandates, right? But I think that's a great point that you bring up, Ashley, because having just getting hiring someone to do an evaluation on your website and then to provide guidance for how to get it up to compliance could be very valuable. And then you will be able to learn the skills that you need to keep it compliant. And that is accessible images, having proper color on your site, these kind of things that I just went over, right? That could be very valuable for sure.
SIPA is who's going to help us set up. And actually, we looked into that Streamline, and because SIPA will do it for you, we went the cheap route.
Yep. Yeah. And OIT, actually, we're working with SIPA to through their platform provider, which is NIC, or sometimes they go by CI, to make sure that their platform is compliant. And there's an example, the Department of Military Veteran Assistance. They have a very small website. They do very little. They don't add anything fancy. And they have, according to our automated accessibility assessment tool, many times 100% compliance. I also want to emphasize that these automated tools only can catch about 30% of accessibility issues. And that's why having an initial assessment can really be helpful. You want to have someone manually test your website, but also I want to give the caveat that if you have a very, very small website and you have the skills that you need, like I said, if you're following those fundamentals, and you understand your platform, like you can Google WordPress accessibility and find out how accessible it is. And like you'll see in that planning presentation, having an accessibility statement on your website and having a contact. So a statement, for example, OIT's accessibility statement, which you're welcome to use. It states that the state is working towards compliance, and we're working towards making everything accessible. So if people can't access your content because of accessibility issues, they will contact you right away so that you can give them the information that they need instead of maybe going to a lawyer, right? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not saying this is going to help you avoid lawsuits, but having an accessibility statement and a contact, because the whole point of the HB 211110 is to provide equitable services. So people with disabilities can access your services and information as quickly as someone who does not have a disability. So we're working with SIPA and to make sure that their platform is affordable and, or not affordable, I'm sorry, accessible. So that is definitely a good route, Nancy. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, and then a question, is there someone to periodically check that websites stay in compliance regularly? Ashley, again, those resources at the end of the last presentation have tools. Those are automated tools, but ultimately you'll want to, at least every 2 years have your website manually tested. That is the best case scenario, really. I know there are resource issues, but just like you want to be security compliant, you also want to be accessibility compliant. And then is there a minimum compliance score or percentage that allows you to still be in compliance? So a compliance score, no, really you want to always be working towards 100% compliance. But like I mentioned earlier, 100% is impossible because you're always adding new content. Your staff changes, you need to provide accessibility, training or these resources to new people. So it's just something that you have to be diligent about. Also, the platforms are always being updated. So knowing the accessibility compliance levels of your platform is really fantastic too. Again, you can Google it. If you're working with a vendor, you need to have a relationship with your vendor where you can talk about accessibility and compliance and hold them accountable for it too. Not easy things to do. All right, I'm gonna post here, oops, okay, not that. I have the accessible meetings guide. This is for a guide for accessible meetings that can help you. also I'm posting the OIT accessibility email address. So if you have accessibility questions, we can provide quick answers for you or point you in the right direction where you can find resources or support.
Great. Are there any other questions for Lori? All right. Well, Lori, we really appreciate your time. It's been very helpful, and I gained quite a bit of information just on you know, the things that I post and send out to folks. So I learned quite a few things here today. So I appreciate that. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.